Tule mukaan taikaan.
I'm Danny Aiello, and you're watching E, like A-I-E-L-L-O. Aiello, and you're watching E, like A-I-E-L-L-O.
Comedy has many faces, and his is one of the most famous, although many would more readily recognize him like this. Jim Carrey was born to be funny. From his childhood in Canada, everyone he met knew he was destined for comic stardom. But what few realized was the hard-knock road Jim Carrey took to get there. Surprisingly, the story of Jim Carrey is as much a drama as a comedy. It is the story of how one man overcame the hardship of homelessness and how one family pulled together to first survive and then thrive.
My father lost his job and we actually became homeless for a long time.
It is a bittersweet romance about a man who twice seemed to find the right woman only to discover the elusiveness of love. It is the story of an artist who worked tirelessly to hone his craft and received early acclaim. By the time he was 22, Jim Carrey starred in his own network sitcom only to see it fail. After making everyone laugh from high school to Hollywood, Jim Carrey no longer thought his act was funny.
I had this standing ovation act, and I got standing O's every night and stuff, and I just quit.
During this hour, we'll see how Jim Carrey used the lowest point of his professional life for a career gamble that paid off by winning him a slot on TV's most controversial comedy show.
Don't let anybody tell you anything. Every comic in this town tried out for living color.
We'll discover how he landed a part in a low-budget movie that changed his life forever.
I'm scared, frankly, you know, because it's really out there.
And you'll learn how a homeless boy believed in himself enough that he became the $20 million man. And Carrey's story once again proves that money can't buy happiness as he divorces for the second time and discovers that his daughter Jane is the only constant in his personal life. This story of talent and dedication will be told through rare performance footage, never-before-seen photographs, and interviews with the fellow entertainers who recognized Jim's talent first.
Well, when he started out 15 years ago, naturally, he wasn't what he is now.
Well, I like to tell my kids, of course, that I discovered Jim Carrey.
Plus, you'll meet those who knew Jim best, from the teacher who auditioned him for a school talent show to the comedy club manager who became his first agent.
At least I do this, you know, Madonna wouldn't go to this trouble.
And you'll hear from Jim Carrey himself, being both hilarious and revealing. It's all a part of Jim Carrey Celebrity Profile.
It is a miracle, but it's a hard, worked for miracle.
Jim Carrey was born January 17, 1962 in Jackson's Point, Ontario, Canada, a small town 30 miles north of Toronto. His father, Percy, was a former musician turned accountant. His mother, Kathleen, dreamed of someday moving to the United States. Jim was the youngest of the 4 children and always seemed to know his destiny lay in the funny side of show business. His early inspirations were Jerry Lewis and Dick Van Dyke, both of whom were known for their loose-limbed physical humor and rubbery faces. Jim performed anywhere he could growing up, first in front of the mirror, then for his family and schoolmates. The Carreys moved in and around the Toronto area during Jim's youth. He attended Blessed Trinity School as a child, and then Aldershot High School in Burlington, Ontario, south of Toronto.
I see Jim Carrey with his name crossed out because he left at Christmas, and he would have sat right about here.
According to Jim's English teacher at Aldershot, David Creighton, Jim Carrey wasn't always the center of attention.
Well, you'd like to think that Jim Carrey would have been the class clown, but he was not. He had probably a more difficult time than most students, and I don't remember him acting up in class. He was keenly attentive.
But Jim had a surprise in store for David Creighton. In the winter of 1976, Creighton auditioned Jim for a high school assembly.
And a couple of girls came on and did their dance, and then there was this student of mine, Jim Carrey. And I said, oh, Jim, what's your talent? Oh, well, I do a few improvisations. Then he went and did Jimmy Stewart, and I fell through the floor, you know. It's just incredible. I said, yeah, you're at the professional level. And he said, well, I do have an agent.
Jim entered show business at such a young age with the support, encouragement, and comic inspiration he received from his close-knit family.
You know, that the family would collaborate on comic routines to an extraordinary extent, as I understand. I didn't know it at the time.
But Jim's happy days were numbered. After rising from accountant to controller at his firm, Percy Carrey was fired from his job at age 51 in 1975. Jim was forced to drop out of school in the 9th grade and take a job alongside his mother, father, and 2 brothers as janitors in Scarborough, a section of metropolitan Toronto. That job proved to be so awful that they quit and accepted the terrifying alternative, that of being homeless and living out of a van. But rather than feeling sorry for himself, Jim would later turn his hard times into hard laughs.
Oh man, see, a lot of people don't know this, but I know a lot about the poor and stuff, because when I was about 14 or 15, my father lost his job and we actually became homeless for a long time. And of course I grew up in Canada, so I thought we had just gone camping, you know, to make a big difference. And they kept me in the dark, really, you know. My parents didn't really let me know what was going on because they were embarrassed and stuff, and you know, that's understandable. Like I'd say, Dad, are we by any chance living below the poverty line? And he'd say, no, son, we're rich as long as we have each other. Now get in the dumpster.
The Carrey clan's best hope for survival seemed to be in Jim's ability to make people laugh. When Celebrity Profile returns, we'll hear from the man who was there the night Jim first stepped on stage as a comedian.
He had a lot of raw talent, but it needed a lot of work.
And later, Jim marries a fellow movie star, but the fairy tale romance doesn't have a happy ending. Jim Carrey had lived an ideal childhood in Canada until his father lost his job and the family became homeless when Jim was only 15. Around the same time, he made his stand-up comedy debut. Jim showed up at the closest local comedy club, Yuck Yucks in Toronto, to perform on stage, having worked on material with his father at an age when high school teacher David Creighton's other students were still on the playground.
And the father, of course, was so supportive of his efforts. And he wrote, I understand, a script for him to use at Yuck Yucks, which shows that the father believed in the son's talents.
The manager of the original Yuck Yucks, who saw Jim Carrey's first night performing there, was David Holliff, later to become Jim's agent and manager.
He had a lot of raw talent, but it needed a lot of work. I mean, here you have a 14 or 15-year-old coming in. He had a tremendous amount of talent, but he did not have any experience. It was his first time, I happened to see him, his first time he performed.
With his family struggling to get by, Jim's first performing experience was not a pleasant one.
The place was packed, and I just remember that he was trying to do all his stuff, but the audience was really heckling him, and he got booed the first time.
Jim didn't return until 2 years later in 1979, this time for good. At age 17, Jim Carrey became a regular at Yuck Yucks, performing there most nights, honing his act into a series of show-stopping musical impressions. He was driven by the burning desire to help his family escape the poverty they had endured for years. Jim's parents found shelter for him and his 2 brothers by pitching a tent on the lawn of the oldest Carrey sister, Rita. Soon, Jim's comedy earnings were helping to put a roof over their heads.
I was attacked by a dog. I was standing in the street, screaming, trying to get the vicious dog off my leg.
One night, just after Jim had turned 19, his act was reviewed by Bruce Blackadar, a local critic for the Toronto Star newspaper. The write-up was a rave review, which, looking back, borders on prophetic. Blackadar wrote, I suspect within 5 years, Carrey, an incredibly precocious, talented 19-year-old comic who hails from Jackson's Point, will be as big as Johnny Carson or Rodney Dangerfield or Richard Pryor.
I remember that article because it said way back then that Jim was going to be a major star. And Bruce Blackadar knew that. You got to give him credit because very few people would make that prediction.
Blackadar ended his review by saying, "Watching him work last night was somewhat like it must have been to see Woody Allen for the first time in the Village in New York. I'm not kidding, folks. Jim Carrey is that good."
Basically, once that article appeared in the Toronto Star, which has a tremendous readership, Jim Carrey's name started coming out to a lot of people, and he started becoming more well-known.
After that, Jim's popularity in his native Canada soared, and his family began to live a more normal life. He started appearing regularly on Canadian television, including the most popular talk show in the country hosted by Alan Thicke.
Back in the early 80s when I was doing my talk show in Canada, I stumbled upon him. There was a buzz already about Jim. We all knew he was special. And we suspected he was insane, and we knew he had to be on camera.
He began making fans among visiting American comedians, including Rodney Dangerfield.
About 15 years ago, I was working in Canada, and someone said to me, "Hey, catch this guy, he's pretty good, you know? Very good, different." So I went over and I caught him, and I liked him very much. So then we worked together. We did about 6 or 8 shows in Canada. Then when I came to the States, I brought him with me to work Caesar's Palace with me, and he worked the Universal Amphitheater with me in Atlantic City, and he did time with me, in a row. So you do it yourself. No one can really help you in show business, but the only thing I did, perhaps, was bring him to the States.
Back in Canada, he made his motion picture debut in Copper Mountain, co-starring with his television mentor, Alan Thicke.
I am going to be a big hit with the ladies.
Jim and I co-starred in a movie together in the mid-'80s that was so terrible, not even Jim Carrey was funny in it. This was a film whose images would barely stick to the celluloid, I think. They resisted, they defied memorialization. And it was about me playing a ski racer, and he was my buddy. It was, naked hot tub mountain bunnies on skis. It was one of those.
The movie was shown only on Canadian television, but stand-up was providing enough money to make sure his family wouldn't once again be homeless. It wasn't long before Jim's sights were set on moving to America permanently. When Celebrity Profile continues, you'll hear from the producer who gave Jim Carrey his own TV series 10 years before Ace Ventura.
And here he was the lead in this pilot, and he probably doesn't know it until I'm saying it right now, but he got much less money than anybody else in the show.
And Jim rocks the Hollywood night scene with singer Linda Ronstadt. By 1981, Jim Carrey's amazing impressions and uproarious stage act had already attracted rave reviews and famous fans, allowing Jim to end his family's homelessness. But he realized that Canada wasn't big enough to hold his talent. With manager David Holliff, Jim decided to move to the United States. Jim's mother had always wanted to make that move, but she was worried about her son facing the temptations of Los Angeles without the support of his family.
And we sat down and talked, and Jim wanted to go there, but his family at the time, because he was still young, you have to understand, and arguably so, that his father and mother were not crazy about him moving to L.A.
While staying at a cheap motel on Sunset Boulevard, Jim got a tryout at the Comedy Store for owner Mitzi Shore, and with nothing more than the promise of a single performance at this world-famous comedy club, Jim decided to make Los Angeles his permanent home.
I did come down here and stay in a really crappy motel, and I had traveler's checks, and the prostitutes wouldn't take them, frankly. And I was just, so I just hung out here and came down to the Comedy Store, did a Monday night, amateur night. Mitzi was sitting in the back going, "Have him killed."
But in fact, Jim thrived at the Comedy Store. Fellow comedian Joey Gaynor worked the club during those early years.
He did an impression of Henry Fonda from On Golden Pond, which just blew me away because he put on a hat and the glasses and turned around. A lot of guys will, turn around and put all, it's the same guy. He turned around and he was Henry Fonda. And it was brilliant. I mean, the stuff he did, the rubber face stuff he could do, and the movement was just incredible.
A mere year and a half after he had arrived scrambling for work, Jim Carrey had become one of Hollywood's hottest young comics. Thanks to his increasing popularity, Jim was asked to appear on a 1983 TV special showcasing the best and brightest new talent. With hardly a word, Jim stole the show.
I think I've spent practically my entire life staring in the mirror. I have, but I wasn't staring at me. I was staring at Leonid Brezhnev. Jack Nicholson. Bruce Dern. Clint Eastwood. Charles Bronson.
Producers, network executives, and casting directors jammed into the Comedy Store to see Jim Carrey firsthand. One of those producers was Alan Burns, the veteran of such long-running hits as The Mary Tyler Moore Show and Lou Grant. Burns was looking to cast a new sitcom about a wacky group of animators called The Duck Factory when he caught Jim's act at the Comedy Store.
This was amazing. Facial resemblance, body resemblance. The voice is absolutely perfect, but more than that, he managed to look like all of these people, assume their attitudes. It was like he got their souls inside him. I've never seen anything quite like it.
Jim did get the role, but his salary for the show was a far cry from the multi-million-dollar paychecks he would collect 10 years later.
Jim was the worst paid person in the whole pilot because he had no credits. And we had people who did have credits, some of them considerable. And here he was the lead in this pilot, and he probably doesn't know it until I'm saying it right now, but he got much less money than anybody else in the show.
But for a young man who had lived out of a van, it seemed like a lot of money. Jim played Skip Tarkenton, a fresh-faced cartoonist. Actor and producer Jay Tarsis co-starred with Jim on the series.
The man was constantly on, you know what I mean? He was always doing something. He had boundless energy, indefatigable, I think, would best describe him. And he was extremely funny all the time, 24 hours a day, to the point where you wanted to say, Jim, just shut up for a minute and let me just sit here. But he was always energetic, and always he was an amazing talent.
In the spring of 1984, he was hired as an opening act for pop singer Linda Ronstadt. The two began dating while Jim was shooting The Duck Factory, according to Jim's co-star, Julie Payne.
He kept mentioning his girlfriend, and one day he said to Teresa Ganzel, could you give me a ride home? Because, I don't have a car, and actually I'm going to my girlfriend's tonight and I need a ride. I wonder if you could, give me a lift. And she said, sure. And so she drove him after work, and they ended up in Bel Air or something. She said, to this big driveway with gates that opened. She said, Jim, who's your girlfriend? And he said, Linda Ronstadt. And Teresa came back and reported that to us, and we all went, who is this guy?
With his own TV series and a knockout nightclub act, Jim thought he had it made. He moved his parents down from Canada, determined to give them back all the material comforts the Carreys had lost long ago. Unfortunately, The Duck Factory only lasted 13 episodes.
But he was nailed into being a male Mary Tyler Moore. Mary hits the big city.
At the age of 24, Jim had a failed sitcom to show for a stay in Hollywood. A forgettable movie, Once Bitten, soon followed. Since neither project led to other offers, it was expected Jim would return to his well-worn stage routine. But instead, Jim Carrey took the biggest gamble of his professional career. When Celebrity Profile returns, Jim's big decision.
I had this standing ovation act, and I got standing O's every night and stuff, and I just quit.
Jim Carrey had been given his shot at TV and movie stardom, but failed to ignite in either medium. His high-profile romance with singer Linda Ronstadt ended when she began dating filmmaker George Lucas. Jim had moved his parents down from Canada when his future looked bright, but now he felt the pressure of supporting them with little work coming his way. His first love had always been performing on stage, but after years building his act, the 24-year-old comedian felt that even there, something was missing.
When I started out, I was doing stand-up. I was an impressionist. I did, and now, a tribute to Sammy Davis, a legend. And that was my whole act, was tributes to people, because tributes get big applause. Oh, that's so nice. Sammy would be so happy.
The impressions worked in Canada and on the road, but Jim feared he was merely following in the footsteps of another famous Canadian impressionist, Rich Little.
He felt that he had more to offer, and he felt the only way to do that was to get away from doing impressions.
I had this standing ovation act, and I got standing O's every night and stuff, and I just quit because I saw that it was leading to Vegas, where, this is my least favorite place on earth. And I just, it wasn't, what I wanted. I wasn't where I wanted to end up.
Jim set about remaking himself into a new comic, and he found inspiration in the no-holds-barred, cutting-edge comedy of Sam Kinison.
I watched a hell of a lot of comedians come up from the time I started in comedy clubs, and Sam was, one of the first ones I sat back and went, man, this guy is really doing something different, he's really challenging people, and I saw him night after night at 2 in the morning, chase half the audience out of the Comedy Store, and I said, if you can be willing to do that, then you're going to do something different with your art, and so I've been chasing people out ever since.
The clean-cut comic from Canada was now hanging out with a hard partying crowd. After closing down the Comedy Store at 2 a.m., Jim and his fellow comedians would often hit the all-night spots along the Sunset Strip.
Well, I think Sam Kinison was an enormous influence on Jim. I mean, he was a little older than Jim, I guess. I don't know how much, but Jim was, 20 at the time, and Sam probably was, although Sam always looked like he was 40, was probably in his late 20s. Jim just thought he was the most amazing comedian he had ever seen.
But Jim soon steered away from the rock and roll lifestyle Kinison embraced. He also walked away from a successful stand-up act for 2 years to develop his creativity. The transition from impressionist to comedian was not overnight. Like another of his idols, Jimmy Stewart, he wanted to be able to play all kinds of parts. But with no money, no job, and no act, the likelihood of Jim Carrey ever becoming a movie star seemed only a distant dream. When Celebrity Profile continues, you'll hear from the fellow comedians who saw Jim Carrey be the unfunniest he's ever been.
He bombed, I would imagine he bombed about 70–80% of the time, because the crowd wasn't buying his stuff.
And the former party animal becomes a loving father. From the age of 17, Jim Carrey had wowed audiences as a show-stopping impressionist, but after a taste of big-time success and the bitter failure that followed, Jim left stand-up comedy for almost 2 years.
He needed a break, and at that point, really, it was difficult for anybody to be his agent or manager because there really wasn't much to manage at that point.
In that time, he still got film parts, but none of them proved to be the breakthrough vehicles he hoped for. One such film was Peggy Sue Got Married, co-starring Kathleen Turner and Nicolas Cage. Jim Carrey played one of Nicolas Cage's high school pals, along with actor and fellow comedian Will Shriner.
During the rehearsal period, I remember we were driving around and we were talking about our careers, and this was going to be our big break. We're in a Francis Ford Coppola movie, and Jimmy had just finished doing Once Bitten, I think it was called, and it was the vampire movie that he was in. So we were driving up by Fox, and he was all excited that this movie was coming out, but it was like, but I'm in a Coppola movie, it's kind of like that. That was that, and I'm sure, there is something when you get to work with certain guys who you've admired and respected as filmmakers all your life. It was like, that was like our springboard. We thought this was all going to happen.
Although Peggy Sue was a hit at the box office, it didn't propel Jim forward in his movie career. He entered into a long dry spell. Unable to support his parents in LA any longer, he made the painful decision to move them back to Toronto. Ultimately, Jim did return to stand-up, but now he refused to rely on his trademark impressions. Often, he insisted on performing at the Comedy Store without prepared material with decidedly mixed results. His only backup was the Comedy Store's piano player, Kelly Moran.
And so Jim would go up on stage and literally wing it, and he bombed a lot. I mean, it was, comics loved it, either because he was bombing or because he was taking chances. But he would go up and have no idea where he was going. And it showed because the audience would stare at him just, you know, like a field of wheat. And he bombed, I would imagine he bombed about 70–80% of the time because the crowd wasn't buying his stuff.
I had one night in particular where I said, I'm not going to do anything prepared. I just got up there and I just started, you know, basically, masturbating in front of the audience. And it wasn't going over at all. So as the night went on, it got worse and worse until I finally crawled into the piano. And I just stayed there for about the next 5 acts.
Every comic who went up said, Jim, get out of the piano. And no, I'm just in the piano. Leave me alone. He would literally scream. And every comic up there couldn't do their act because there was this guy buried into the piano, and I could barely play the thing anyway because he muffled all the strings.
Jim's new experimental style of comedy involved no celebrity impersonations and went more for the outrageous and ironic rather than middle of the road, as can be seen in this 1992 special celebrating the Comedy Store's 20th anniversary.
It's a quick impression. You can do this at your parties when you're entertaining. I call it the Angry St. Bernard. Thank you very much. Yeah. I'm quite an entertainer. I'd like to do some observational humor for you now. I hope you can identify with it. Hey, don't you hate when you're in bed with 3 women and the least attractive one whispers, "Save it for me"?
It was during those dark days of experimentation that Jim made a friend who would be with him throughout his rise to TV and film stardom. The comedian was Steve Odekirk, who would later work with Jim on In Living Color and the Ace Ventura movies.
Jim had done impressions and he'd put a new spin on it, but in his mind it was still doing impressions, and he wasn't getting the soul of his comedy out. So I think it was just really smart because he turned away from something that was extremely successful for him in front of a crowd, and then dabbled in things that were really hot and cold with him in front of a crowd until that became more successful than what he used to do. And that's a lot to bite off when you're in, when your impressions act is getting standing ovations.
But being back in the stand-up scene had another effect on Jim. He met Melissa Womer, a waitress at the Comedy Store. Their friendship turned to romance, and they married March 28, 1986. In 1987, Jim's personal and professional life began to turn around. His daughter Jane was born. The former all-night partier was now a devoted family man. Jim also scored another movie role. He co-starred as Whiplock, a fur-covered alien in the sci-fi musical spoof Earth Girls Are Easy. His love interest in the film was co-star Julie Brown, who also wrote the film's screenplay.
He was like you were changing a remote control on a TV. He could do that, and he did that in the movie. So he was perfect for them. When I used to watch him as a stand-up, sometimes I'd go like ew, because he'd do these really gross things with his face. But it was perfect for Earth Girls. So he got the part. I mean, we all voted for him. We're like, yeah, he's an alien. Hire him.
Earth Girls was not released until 1989, 2 years after filming, and greeted with lukewarm reviews and unspectacular box office. At another career low, Jim wrote himself a mock paycheck for $10 million, post-dating it Thanksgiving 1995. He took to driving up into the Hollywood Hills at night and imagining himself rich and famous as he looked out over the Los Angeles skyline. But the turning point in Jim's career was just around the corner. When we return, you'll hear what it was really like working with Jim Carrey on In Living Color.
People used to like dread doing those sketches with Jim because you'd be up until 4 o'clock in the morning.
Jim Carrey had gone from successful stand-up to star of his own TV series to struggling comic looking to redefine his act. Along the way, he had married and started a family of his own. The paychecks came from occasional film work, such as his gig in the ensemble cast of Earth Girls Are Easy. Most of Jim's scenes were with fellow aliens Jeff Goldblum and Damon Wayans. The movie didn't amount to much, but it would pay off handsomely for Jim. Damon's brother Keenan Ivory Wayans was casting a new primetime comedy for Fox. It was called In Living Color. Damon remembered his alien co-star and Comedy Store friend and mentioned him to his brother. Jim still had to audition for the show, along with fellow comedian and soon-to-be co-star Tommy Davidson. The fateful tryout happened one night at the Laugh Factory on the Sunset Strip.
Every comic in this town tried out for In Living Color. I'm telling you right now, everybody was there trying to get on In Living Color. Yeah, it was a big deal. And that night, 39 comics went on, and, you know, among all of them, we were chosen to do the show.
Although first known as the only male Caucasian in the cast, Jim quickly caught on in the public eye. Now, instead of crowd-pleasing impressions, Jim favored offbeat characters such as Fire Marshal Bill.
Where did he come from, Fire Marshal Bill?
Well, he started out as the half-flesh man, which was, he was supposed to be a person that, it was actually a family of half-flesh people who worked as medical dummies and worked as the models for medical journals, like this kind of thing. Pancreas. You know, that kind of thing. And, you know, I don't know, I have no idea what the sketch was going to be. It was just, I just created it. I thought it would be a marvelous visual. And it never got on the show, but it started snowballing from there. I started just coming in and doing the face all the time, and people would flip out. And then at the Comedy Store, I started messing around, closing down the show, you know, at night, going, there's too many people in this room, you know, and all that. Just, look at this wiring.
People used to like dread doing those sketches with Jim because you'd be up until 4 o'clock in the morning trying to get all the stuff right because they had all the special effects. You know, so the flame would blow up, boom, you know, and they go, cut, you know, and what do you think, Jim? Nah, man, nah, the flame's got to come up to here, man, or it's not going to look like, you know, all night long. Perfectionist, man.
Jim was now more popular than ever before. On In Living Color, he had finally found a home for his freewheeling humor.
Yes, that's right. Another tribute to Burl Ives. By the way, I'd like to do some impressions now of different animals mating in the wild.
I like it.
Oh, jeez! Oh, right in the eye! Come on!
Oh, man, that's great.
Comedy! Comedy! Don't bother me!
Jim stayed with In Living Color for 4 seasons, reuniting with Steve Oderkirk after his old friend was hired as a writer on the show. During that time, Jim was offered the lead in a low-budget comedy called Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
Is it true that you originally turned down Ace?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, they came after me for about 2 years to do that film. I just didn't like the script, and basically, you know, the turning point was where they came to me and said, you can rewrite it from page 1. And so I had an out. I could, you know, I had script approval when I was finished. I wouldn't have to do it if I didn't want to.
The only thing that remains in the film, which matters and which is important, is the concept that it was a detective, but he was a pet detective, and someone steals an animal, and he has to go on this crazy journey to find out who stole this animal and solve the case. That is truly from the first script. Beyond that, everything changed.
Writing took place after midnight, according to Pam Bissay, who was a producer on In Living Color.
I remember he and Steve Oderkirk were writing the first Ace Ventura, and I was doing a pilot. And after work, after doing all of In Living Color work, at about midnight, each of us would start our project. So I'd be in my office writing the pilot, and they'd be in the office writing Ace Ventura. And at about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jim would run out and go, break! And we'd go in the kitchen and we'd gummy bears and licorice, and then you'd like scream, shake, holler, giggle, then go back to your office and finish.
While shooting in Florida, Jim took his newfound comedy skills and put them to work creating Ace Ventura. The newcomer who had stuck to the script of The Duck Factory was now trusting his instincts.
I get really worried if I'm just going to, walk to the set and do exactly what's on the paper. So it comes from stand-up. It comes from, trying to create sketches on In Living Color and basically putting them out there once and, having them flop and then them going, we're going to do another take. Great. Didn't work the first time. And having to come up with something really quick. And you just get used to that. And now that I'm doing films, there's so much more time that it's, I almost have to stop myself from thinking it too much. Because when I did Ace, I was literally coming out of the trailer every day going, I changed it completely.
We wrote a script and now it means nothing.
Ace was a surprise hit in February of 1994, pulling in $12 million over its opening weekend. Jim Carrey had a whole new following on and off screen.
Just don't let me catch you with an animal in here, that's all.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye then.
Loser.
Come to me, jungle friends.
I think you know that somebody's really ready to take off when kids start to do impressions of them, when it becomes schoolyard conversational fodder. And early on with Jim, my kids and their peers were doing impressions of him. And that's when you know that you've struck a nerve.
But success was bittersweet. During the filming of Ace, Jim and Melissa Carey separated. Divorce papers were filed before the film was released. When Celebrity Profile returns, we'll chart Jim Carrey's rise to the top of the box office heap and wedding bells ring for the second time. "1994 was the year Jim Carrey had been waiting for all his life. Ace Ventura was the surprise hit of the spring. He had already filmed another movie before Ace was released, The Mask. It was a smash summer hit, and before long, Jim Carrey was signed to make Dumb and Dumber for $7 million. The visions of fame and fortune he had summoned while driving up to the Hollywood Hills were coming true. But with Jim's success came heartache. His mother, Kathleen, had died in 1991, and his father, Percy, had fallen ill. When Percy died in 1994, Jim took the check he had written to himself for $10 million long ago and slipped it into his father's pocket at the funeral. Just days before, Jim Carrey had signed the deal to star in the sequel to The Mask for $10 million. After the end of his first marriage, Jim remained close to his daughter, Jane.
Although I consider myself a good father, I spend a lot of time with my daughter. Even if you spend all the time you can with your son or daughter when you've had a broken marriage, there's a certain amount of guilt that you have no matter how hard you try.
During the filming of Dumb and Dumber, Jim began to date his co-star, Lauren Holly. The two had first met when she auditioned for Ace Ventura. The heat of their romance seemed to be in step with the heat of Jim's career. Batman Forever was a huge hit, as was Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls, The Cable Guy, and Liar Liar. In the fall of 1996, Jim and Lauren married in a private ceremony in Malibu, California. For months, the couple appeared happy together as they made the rounds of premieres and parties. They were one of the most photographed couples in the world, but less than a year later, without public explanation, Lauren Holly filed for divorce. From homeless teenager to divorced dad, Jim Carrey's quest for family stability was not as successful as his quest for fame. It has been a roller coaster ride for Jim Carrey, full of highs and lows, a journey from unknown struggling comedian to international celebrity, a journey that even amazes Jim himself.
Hi. Hi there. There's so many people here today that have done so much for me. It really is an amazing thing, and I could never thank them all. Everybody's been so encouraging to me. You know, I'm without words because I think the best things in life are undescribable. Thank you so much.
For Jim, the hardships he has endured have been balanced by the joy he has brought millions through his gift for laughter.
All right, I'm gonna give him a rough idea of the film. You got two characters, Dumb and Dumber, right? One of them is a limo driver. He has a love interest. He finds out she's going to Aspen, follows her there. Actually follows her to Aspen. And as you can see, it's a very funny premise.
Every time, I just lose it. It's such a, the concept alone, it's just amazing. Two dumb guys get together and go on a trip. Somebody kill me!
Did you ever think you would get to this point? Were there times when you doubted that you would achieve this?
Well, well, of course. I mean, you don't expect it. I mean, you don't just, you know, I couldn't get up in the morning and say it's gonna happen. That's all there is to it. You know, I mean, a lot of times I found myself walking around the streets, you know, thinking that's my spot right there. You know, by the bin, by the garbage bin. You know, there's been a lot of times where I, you know, street people come up to me and say, "How you doing, man? You okay?" You know. So, you know, I never completely counted on it, but I've always had kind of a belief in miracles.
I did dream a lot about, you know, doing things with people that I loved watching growing up, and you know, with top flight everything, you know, and that's the greatest part about it right now, and the most unbelievable for me is that I get to go into things that I want to do and have the best people around me. So you take your little ball of clay and you go, okay, it's a dog, you know, and somebody else who you respect and love, their creativity takes it and goes, it's a dog with wings, you know, and does his little thing on it. And that's the great thing about movies. It's not a solitary art form. You have to kind of trust the universe and trust the people you're with.
I have no idea how I did this, really. I really don't know. I just kept writing jokes. It's all about jokes, you know. That's what I still say. I say that to my family all the time. I sit in my house and, you know, my wife gets a new dress and I go, see that dress? Jokes. Jokes about that dress. You know, that kind of stuff. I'm always ripping them about that. Jokes about everything, you know. But it's really true. It's amazing that you can just kind of make a living this way.
Comedy usually comes from, you know, adversity or, you know, something in your, you know, in your upbringing or something that made you desperate enough to get up and want to, you know, command a whole, you know, stadium, you know, full of people's attention, you know. I mean, the sickest guy in the room is the guy with the mic, the amplification system, I guarantee you every time.
Porter on hyvä jätkä, mutta nämä eivät ole. Ja hän on oikein kavala.
I'm on the fucking...
He ovat vieneet Porterin rahat.
Stitch this mud up. It's my money. Wrong, Porter. It's our money, Porter. This will kill you.
Eikä kukaan ole enää kiltti. Siispä. Tähän loppui hyvän jätkän maine. On takaisinmaksun aika, payback.
My money, yes or no? You just dug your own grave. He's behind us.
Näe Mel Gibson ja tosi pahat tyypit. Kanal Plusalla.
Man, that's just mean. Stop it, I'm getting misty.
Liittovaltio on hirvittävän uhan edessä ja kapteeni Picard joutuu käyttämään pahinta asetta, mitä Enterpriseilta löytyy.
Hold your course.
He wouldn't. Yes, he would.
Time's up.
No! His nose should pant.
And his lips should curl.
His cheeks should flame. And his brow should furl.
His bosom should heave.
And his heart should glow. And his fist be ever ready for a knockdown blow.
That's more like
The Star Trek Mambo.
Murder?
Boy's best friend is his mother.
Uusi versio vanhasta mestariteoksesta.
She just goes a little mad sometimes.
Psycho.
Mother! Oh, God! Mother!